Welcome to the June 22nd, 2020 Troy City Council meeting. I will call the meeting to order and turn it over to City Clerk Dixon for the roll call.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Abraham?
Here.
Councilmember Brooks?
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Here.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Hullick?
Here.
All present. First on the agenda is a vote on a resolution to waive the rules of procedure for City Council Rule Number 8, Proclamations and Congratulatory Certificates. And I'll move resolve that the Troy City Council hereby waives the rules of procedure for the City Council Rule Number 8, Proclamations and Congratulatory Certificates, to approve and present a proclamation to recognize Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, June 2020.
Support.
Moved by the chair, supported by Councilmember Abraham, that we approve the vote on the resolution to waive the rules of procedure as read into the record. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hullick?
Yes.
Motion carries. So next on the agenda is C1, proclamations and special presentations. I'm actually going to read this proclamation into the record tonight. It's a proclamation for Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, June 2020. Whereas June is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month, a time dedicated to increasing public awareness of Alzheimer's disease, available resources, and how you can get involved to support the cause. Whereas Alzheimer's disease is the 6th leading cause of death in the United States, deaths due to Alzheimer's have increased an alarming 146% since 2000, while deaths for most other major diseases remain flat or decreased. More than 5 million Americans are living with the disease, and there are more than 16 million caregivers of people living with Alzheimer's and other dementias in the United States. And whereas the more than 16 million caregivers provided an estimated 18.6 billion hours of unpaid care, a contribution to the nation valued at more than $244 billion. In 2020, Alzheimer's disease will cost the United States $305 billion. This number is projected to rise to more than $1.1 trillion in 2050. And whereas without an effective treatment, prevention, or cure, the number of people with Alzheimer's disease is expected to increase 15% by the year 2025. Almost 2/3 of Americans with Alzheimer's disease are women, and 1 in 3 senior citizens dies with Alzheimer's or another dementia. 50% of primary care physicians believe the medical profession is not ready for the growing number of people with Alzheimer's or other dementias. We need more geriatricians and primary care physicians trained to take on the growing dementia population. And whereas Alzheimer's disease is an epidemic that affects more than just one person, more than just the person diagnosed. Family and friends see their loved ones struggle with changes related to the brain disease while dealing with changes to their personal and professional lives. By raising concern for the effects of Alzheimer's disease and building awareness for its symptoms and the need to seek early diagnosis, we can improve the quality of life for all. And whereas the Alzheimer's Association Michigan chapter offers free resources for people facing Alzheimer's disease, including in-person education and support programs, free dial-in and virtual programming to Michigan residents, a 24-hour helpline and website at alz.org. It also provides critical international leadership and funding to advance research towards methods of treatment, prevention, and ultimately a cure for Alzheimer's. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Troy hereby proclaims June 2020 as Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month in the City of Troy, and joins with the Alzheimer's Association Michigan chapter to honor all people suffering from this disease and all caregivers of people living with Alzheimer's for their strength and determination. And be it further resolved that the City Council of the City of Troy asks everyone to come together this month to support Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month and to join the fight against Alzheimer's by taking part in the annual Walk to End Alzheimer's, the world's largest event to raise awareness and funds for Alzheimer's care, support, and research. And be it further resolved that the City of Troy will illuminate City Hall's outside lights used during the holidays from June 23rd through June 30th at night in the color purple, the color representing Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. presented this 22nd day of June 2020. I'm very happy to present this proclamation to those watching at home and the folks at the Alzheimer's Association Michigan chapter. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the world and in our city, but it's always important to remember all of the other diseases that are going on and how that's affecting all of us who work so hard as caregivers and the families and friends who are dealing with the consequences of having a loved one with Alzheimer's, a horrible disease, and also brain health awareness in general. So it's our proclamation. Our lights will be turned on outside of City Hall for the next week to bring attention, and I encourage everyone to go to alz.org to look at ways that you can help, perhaps a walk to end Alzheimer's, or also just for resources as well. Okay, that's it for section C of our agenda. Next up, there are no D carryover items. There are no public hearings, so we have public comment. I also have another resolution to move. It's a vote on resolution to waive the rules of procedure for the City Council, rule number 15, members of the public and visitors. Resolved that Troy City Council hereby waives the rule of procedures for the City Council, rule number 15, members of the public and visitors, as amended on April 13, 2020, to include public comment received after 4 p.m.
Support.
Moved by the chair, supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt, that we vote on the resolution to waive the rules as just read into the record. And for discussion, I'll say we received some public comment after the deadline, and obviously we do our best to include that if we're able to, and we are able to by waiving these rules. So any other discussion? Great, the vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Abraham,
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks,
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Crainga,
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton,
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick,
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes. So I'll turn it over to City Clerk Dixon for any public comment received via email or voicemail.
Thank you, Mayor. Tonight we have 2 email comments, and then we will have a voicemail comment at the end. The first comment is from John German. As history has seen various pandemics and elements of existence flow through life's views, vaccines and such have been heroically researched with, I am sure, countless hours to help the world for the nows and the tomorrows. Though not much is ever specified in terms of holistic medicines. The beauty of life in nature's medicine cabinet that can help defend during all the days, including those while a vaccine is being found. Things like below that I have taken from LinkedIn posts that I have put up on my profile. Oats. Oatmeal contains a certain type of fiber called beta-glucan fiber. This fiber protects against heart disease and also revs up the immune system. It helps the immune cells seek out and repair areas of the body that may be fighting a bacterial infection. Blueberries. Blueberries contain a type of flavonoid called anthocyanin, which has antioxidant properties that can help boost a person's immune system. And a 2016 study noted that flavonoids play an essential role in the respiratory tract's immune defense system. Sumac. Sumac has been long used as a natural treatment for respiratory and chest problems such as bronchitis, chest congestion, and cough. Only recently, studies pinpointed the components that contribute to its healing properties. It is high in volatile oil, including geraniol, borneo, carvacrol, and thymol. Dark chocolate. Irritable bowel syndrome, chronic fatigue syndrome, autism spectrum disorders, allergies, asthma, and cancer have all been linked to abnormal gut microbiomes. Dark chocolate helps to normalize these gut microbiomes to defend the rest of the body. Green teas. Green tea relax the smooth muscles of blood vessels, thereby preventing high blood pressure. Moreover, it also prevents the formation of thrombus and blood clots, thus making the flow of blood easy. Ginseng. Some studies have shown that the use of ginseng may improve lung function. I drink honey lemon ginseng green tea, and its powerfully healthy feelings are quite potent. Mullein. Great for respiratory disorders and known for its antiviral and anti-inflammatory, and soothe the respiratory tract, ease ear pain, and fight infection. And researchers found that mullein helped kill certain types of bacteria, including Staphylococcus aureus, the most common type of staph infection, and Escherichia E. coli. Hyssop. Coughing is a common reaction of the respiratory system trying to expel harmful microbes, dust, or irritants. So hyssop's antispasmodic and antiseptic properties make it a great natural treatment for coughs and other respiratory conditions. Boswellia benefits of Boswellia include the ability to speed healing and provide relief from a sore throat, cold, or flu much faster. This supposedly also helps to promote the regulation of antibodies. And that's 3 minutes.
Okay.
The second public comment is from Susan Setsky. Under no circumstances do we want our fabulous police department defunded. God bless them and keep them safe as they work to keep us safe. We are 30-year residents of the wonderful city of Troy. And our third comment is a voicemail from Carrie Birmingham from the Troy School District.
Dear Mayor Baker, members of the City Council, and City Manager Mark Miller, my name is Carrie Birmingham, and I'm the Director of Communications for the Troy School District. On behalf of the TSD, I want to express my sincere gratitude to the City of Troy for your invaluable help in making our Class of 2020 graduations a spectacular event on Saturday. When the pandemic hit, all the plans we had to honor this class became impossible to execute. We were left not knowing when or if we could hold a graduation ceremony for each school or what the future might bring for gatherings of that size. We felt very strongly that we needed to recognize these graduates now before they left for the military, for college, and for jobs. It was becoming increasingly clear that we were waiting for a date that might not be possible, and we wanted to get this class closure in an appropriate way so they could feel positive about their K-12 experience and move on to the next step in their journeys. With very little time to plan, we approached the City of Troy and we asked for your help. We did not have a venue where we could plan 4 back-to-back graduations, but we thought that the Civic Center area and its multiple parking lots and roads throughout would be perfect. From the moment we asked, every department and every person immediately bent over backwards to help out. From the City Clerk's office, who approved our permit request in record time, to the Troy Police, who lent their expertise over and over as the plans were tweaked again and again, and then spent the entire day with us to make sure that traffic flowed and everyone had a great time. To the Department of Public Works, who provided guidance, extensive signage, and all-important traffic cones. To the Recreation Department, who lent us an incredible stage so that our graduates were proud to walk across. DPW spent hours setting up and even reached out to us with a better parking lot configuration when they came up with an improved idea. And of course, we're so appreciative to the Community Affairs Department, who helped us through the entire process and answered questions morning, noon, and night. It should be said that the whole plan changed several times, but not one department batted an eye. What started as a pure drive-through event became a hybrid when the governor's orders relaxed a bit, and everyone from department heads to the crews on the ground pivoted and showed incredible flexibility alongside us. We billed this as 4 community graduations, and I can tell you that the City of Troy and our partnership with you is what made that happen. The feedback from Saturday has been overwhelmingly positive, and everyone from our graduates to their families to our friends at Tim Hortons who donated thousands of cold drinks praised this as the coming together of an entire community to make sure these students know exactly how much they mean to all of us. To say we're appreciative is an understatement, and we'd like to thank our elected officials and our city leaders and let everyone in our community know the quality of people who go above and beyond every day working for the City of Troy. To put it simply, we could not have done this without you, and our school community is incredibly grateful.
Okay, so I understand that was the third and final public comment, correct, City Clerk?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, very good. Well, as a reminder to those watching, if anyone can submit public comment by 4 p.m. on the day of the meetings, as long as we're having these virtual meetings, by calling and leaving a voicemail at 248-524-3302 or by emailing publiccomment@troymi.gov. Now is an opportunity for City Council or City Administration to comment on as it relates to the public comments provided. Would anybody like to say anything? Not seeing anybody. I will just thank the 3 who provided their comment. Definitely good information and input. And to Carrie Birmingham and the Troy School District, I mean, obviously The more we can help each other in this community, always the better. I think you make us look good as a city, and it's nice to hear that we helped you look pretty good, I guess, this weekend as well. But we greatly value our partnership with the school district, and it's certainly not the graduation I think that our students were expecting, but it sounds like we were able to give them at least something meaningful and memorable. So very good. Thank you. There are no postponed items this evening. We move on to regular business. There are no mayoral appointments, and I'll turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton for city council appointments.
Thank you, Mayor. I have just one appointment and no nominations today. Troy City Council hereby appoints to the Election Commission Raymond Watts for the Republican seat expiring January 31st, 2021.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that the Troy City Council appoints Raymond Watts as the Republican representative to the Election Commission for the term expiring January 31st, 2021. Any discussion? Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
I just really want to thank Mr. Watts for stepping up on this position on very short notice. We really needed him for this upcoming election. He responded and applied very quickly, and I really appreciate for him for doing that. Thank you.
Well said. The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Brooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Crainga.
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham.
Yes.
Motion carries. And again, we thank Mr. Watts. I imagine he's probably got to have a meeting pretty soon with the August 4th election coming up. So thank you for your service, Mr. Watts. There are no mayoral nominations this evening, no city council nominations under I2. So we will move on to I3. There's no request for a closed session, which takes us all the way to I4. Standard Purchasing Resolution 8, Citizen, Business, and Library Surveying Services. It'll be introduced by City Manager Mark Miller, and here I see Assistant City Manager Bob Booner's up on the screen as well. So, City Manager Miller.
Thank you, Mayor, and hello, Council. Before you, you have a package of 3 different surveys. One is regarding a single issue, the library, based upon your previous discussions in the millage that could happen in the near future, and then a resident and business survey. We were working on one a while back and before the previous election, and it stalled. And then when Mr. Bruner came in as Assistant City Manager, he had some experience and knowledge in other types of survey services that benchmark a community, which you can compare yourself in the future. And so Bob will present this, and you will have the ability to authorize a resolution for all 3 of the surveys. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. As Mark mentioned, there was actually, Troy's done a lot of surveys over the years. When I came to the city a year ago, I kind of looked back at some of the work that's been done in the past. This most recent effort started back in March 2019, and it had stalled last fall. And so we reported that we were going to propose a resident and business benchmarking survey at some point in the future. And then unfortunately, that kind of got backburnered for a while until due to the pandemic and the increased need to get public input and our decreased ability to do it in in-person meetings and that sort of thing. So we had done some research into organizations that do this kind of work. There are 2 that we found that do these kind of surveys for local governments across the country. One is Cobalt Community Research, which is based here in Michigan. It's a nonprofit, and as Mark mentioned, we used Cobalt Community Research like 11 years ago when I was city manager in Ferndale, and had a really good experience with it there. And I found out Ferndale just recently redid the survey. You're not supposed to wait like a decade in between, but I guess other things happened. The other organization that does this kind of work nationally is a National Research Center. And this is one actually that Troy did probably 15 years ago or so. So they're both nationally recognized, good surveys. And the agenda packet includes kind of a side-by-side comparison of the costs and what's offered by each service. They're very similar, and ultimately what it came down to was price. And Cobalt Community Research, based here in Michigan, has a great product to offer at a little bit lower price compared to the National Research Center. And so that's what we're recommending for both the business and resident survey. And then based on discussion at the last city council meeting, as it relates to the need for public engagement on library research, we asked Cobalt to give us a proposal for an additional survey, single issue survey about the library specifically. And so they provided that an additional cost of $10,250. So if City Council approves this package, it's actually 3 agreements tonight, then we will immediately begin work on the library survey because that's time sensitive. And we need to get the ball rolling on that as soon as tomorrow. And then we'll be working on the resident and business surveys after that. So with that, I'll pause here and ask if anybody has any questions.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Bob and Mark, for putting this together. Great information here. My question is, I imagine we'll have a special session to, like we did last year, to discuss the questions for the business and resident survey. As far as the library service question, how are we going to hash out what questions we're going to ask given the very short time scale? Are we going to do that tonight, or do we plan maybe at the next council meeting, or what's the plans for that?
I plan to do it with Cobalt and Kathy tomorrow afternoon at 2:00.
Okay.
So you won't have a chance. We're going to move so quickly on this. You won't have a chance to see it. It's going to be a 2-page, 2-sheet front and back. It'll also be available online. But Cobalt has experience with other library surveys. They've provided us some samples, so we've already had a chance to look at them. So I don't anticipate that this would come back to City Council.
Given the time frame, I'm fine with that. I trust the State Librarian of the Year to know what to do, to ask the right questions. I just hope it asks, maybe gets into perhaps the condition of the building. And you guys do what you do, but I'd be curious to see the interest among Troy residents on a new building or updated building for the library. That's my only feedback on that.
I'm assuming based on our conversation in I-9 tonight, and maybe on some of the reports, they'll have some good information to take with them as they, meaning you, Bob, and you, Kathy, to work with if you have it. I'm like you said, Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, I know Kathy has already got some good thoughts on this, and Bob, you do too. So I'm not worried about it, but I think there'll be ample opportunity tonight with our agenda to get any last minute, commentary in there. Councilmember Chamberlain-Cranga.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you very much for taking this forward. I'm so glad to see this on the agenda. And I'm glad we get to support a local Michigan nonprofit in the process. That's wonderful. Thing I wanted to call out with the library research is that I really appreciate that there's mixed methods involved with this. As a social scientist, I've always find that the quantitative part, which is the survey polling part, tells you the what, but the qualitative, the focus groups will tell you the why. It tells you the motives, the aspirations, and that actually really helps with decision making. So I did have a question around focus groups. I did notice in the contract that it's calling for 2 focus groups, and that it's up to the city to decide who will comprise those focus groups, and just wondered how you will go about determining who will take part in those focus groups. And I asked that, I had raised a question is, could the FIT team, the financial ideas team, be kind of reactivated to play a role in that? just trying to think about what we have existing. The only thing is that group does tend to skew older male. We do have the Global Troy Advisory Committee that tends to be a part of FIT. That's when I've taken part in the FIT meetings. And I just would want to ask that whatever, however we go about comprising those groups, that we just really think about the diversity of our community, just knowing that our library is where we really see the diversity of our community come together. That is something I appreciate about the community. So really would want to ask that our Global Troy Advisory Committee members could take part, or some sort of, or bearing that in mind as we think about comprising those groups. But would love to just hear what you're thinking about in terms of selection of who will take part in those focus groups.
Steve Angelillo? Or, sorry.
Mayor, I'll just jump in really quick and I'll let Bob fill in. Bob and I have not had a lot of discussion about the makeup of the focus group, but we have had a little. We didn't really decide how we would comprise it at this time, but we're definitely thinking about your comments are valid and we can take them into our decision-making process. And Bob, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, just that we had talked about the FIT team and Global Troy, and we can look at other boards and commissions, community members that we can get in touch with quickly, because obviously this is really time is of the essence. So to a certain extent, it's the focus group is going to be comprised of people who can make themselves available.
Right. Could I make just one quick comment too, is I meant also generation, knowing that some of our committees have youth representatives. So it'd be great to have also all ages, seniors and youth as well, to be a part of that.
Kathy?
I just want to mention, I think what we'll also do is we'll tap into the, whether they're library users or not, we have contacts with the school and parents, and we have several parent groups who meet at the library. They have parents of children with special needs. And I think to just have a really broad array of feedback, we would be looking to involve those groups as well.
Thank you.
Other questions? Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to follow up on a question I had asked earlier this afternoon, and I see the response for it. It looks like Cobalt will be sending out a couple 3,000 surveys between mail and online responses, and the statistically significant response rate would be, a few hundred responders. I guess my question is do online responders skew younger than those who would respond via snail mail? And do we have any provisions in place to normalize that data, or at least take into account the age and gender demographics?
Yeah, I can answer that. And the short answer is yes. The way Cobalt conducts this is that they'll do a random sample of registered voters for the targeted mailing, and those survey participants will have unique identification, and so they'll be coded a certain way in the results. And then the people who respond online will, also be coded in the data, so you'll be able to tell the difference between the two. And they do cross tabulations based on demographics as well.
Councilmember Abraham, did you have more?
No, I just want to make sure we have a cross section of our city. I know that sometimes you can get different results depending on the methodology or the mechanism that you do the survey, and I just want that to be factored in. I trust Cobalt knows what they're doing. This is not their first survey, but just want to make sure that our residents who are watching this understand, that there are different mechanisms from which the survey responders can respond. And yes, there could be some differences in age or demographics, but the way that it's conducted will take that into account, and we won't have skewed results.
You go ahead, Bob.
In addition to the normal things that Cobalt does, if you look at the agreement, we have opted for kind of an additional add-on option, which is added demographic questions for filtering results. And so it's an additional cost of only $890 above what they normally do. But basically, we're doing the most that we can in terms of filtering for demographics.
Great, thank you.
Other questions? Someone like to move the resolution? Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
I'd like to move I-4 Standard Purchasing Resolution 8, City Business and Library Surveying Services as printed in the agenda packet.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, supported by Councilmember Chamberlain-Krianga, that we approve I-4 Standard Purchasing Resolution 8, Citizen Business and Library Surveying Services as printed. Discussion. Councilmember Hoderick.
Really want to thank staff for moving so quickly and especially enabling us to get feedback regarding the library so quickly. And to residents that are looking at this and wondering about the investment, this is the most efficient way we can ensure that we have engagement with the communities so that we are best representing the interests of the community. I think sometimes in the past there's been a perception of council, city management moving forward without taking the time to get really solid input from the residents. And we are really, in spite of COVID, in spite of the difficulties of meeting face-to-face with residents, looking to really understand the desires of folks as we move forward and what represent you to the best of our abilities. So again, I really appreciate the fast work on this and the thorough work. And for those of you on council who are very statistically inclined, I'm glad to have you on board to help us to sort through this. I feel really good about the engagement we're doing with this. COVID aside, we're doing it as thoroughly as we can, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Assistant City Manager Brunner?
Yeah, before you vote, I have to add my thanks to Drew Benson from the City Manager's Office. You all know Drew. Drew's leaving the city for a new position, but he's the one who really did a lot of the legwork on this and helped get it across the finish line. These memos, they come to you as a final product, but this is one of those agenda items that just went back and forth and bounced from department to department, and Drew really stayed on top of it. So I have to give him the credit for us being able to bring it to you tonight.
Thank you. Other discussion? I will, since you brought up Drew now, Bob, I'll go ahead and throw in a quick. I guess this will be the last meeting that he's not here tonight, but he's watching somewhere maybe. I think he's leaving before our next council meeting. So I guess I'll just say a special thanks to Drew for all the work he's done since he's been in the city manager's office. And for those of you that don't know, he works very hard at providing us with city manager all of the answers to all the questions we ask all the time. And he does a lot of resident interface, and that will be tough to follow, I think, for the next person there. And I know, of course, we will. But we wish Drew the best of luck as he moves on to his next position, and he will be missed in Troy. As for the specific item, I-4, I'm so glad to see this back on the agenda and have the opportunity to vote for it tonight. Certainly, although I maybe disagree with how you phrased it as we stalled out with it last fall. I don't know if it was that so much as it took a few different paths, but this is important for us to have a means of community engagement, especially in a time when we're not allowed to go meet at the community center or at the library in large groups of people and have the conversations that we'd really like to be having. So I think this survey is a good start. I certainly would encourage everyone to continue to email us your thoughts and opinions on all these issues. Don't assume that you'll get a survey or be one of the people. We still want to hear from you regardless, but I also want to thank Bob and Kathy in advance for how hard they're going to have to work over the next few days to get the library portion going, recognizing we're up against a timing issue as it relates to approving ballot language for the funding of the library, and also whoever on staff had the wherewithal to say, hey, let's make sure we put in the date of August 3rd into the agreement with Cobalt so that we can more likely guarantee that we get that timing taken care of before we need to vote on that language. So thank you for that. Looking forward to seeing results of the library, looking forward to providing any additional input that you need for the businesses and resident surveys as well as we move forward in this process. And I'm excited about all that. So that said, I'll call for the vote. Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig.
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham.
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks.
Yes.
Motion carries. Kathy, you're not on the screen right now, but I hope you're jotting down questions already. So next up on the agenda is I-5, 2020-2021 budget amendments and reappropriations. This is going to be introduced by Chief Financial Officer Rob Malzak. I see Rob has popped onto the screen. Welcome, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, Council. Thank you. As you are aware, the city's fiscal year end is June 30th. This is the last meeting of our fiscal year, so what we do is we analyze the financial statements and come to you with any departments in need of a budget amendment so we can comply with the Michigan Uniform Budgeting and Accounting Act. As we spoke about at budget time, the engineering department is in need of an amendment due to higher volumes of projects, permits, requiring additional outside consulting inspection. Secondly, we analyze the financial statements for projects that were approved in the 2020 budget that weren't able to be finished by year end. These are primarily capital projects, and what we do is we reappropriate the funds to the following fiscal budget year of 2021. So before you is a resolution with those two items.
Okay. We've had an opportunity to review these. Does anybody have any questions for city management? I guess not. Someone like to move the resolution? I guess not. Okay. Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. I will move I-5, 2020-2021 budget amendments and reappropriations as printed.
Support.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Abraham, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that we approve I-5, 2020-2021 budget amendments and reappropriations as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion? I will just say as a reminder to those who have concerns about COVID-19 and how we approved a budget in the middle of a pandemic, this is how easy it is to make budget amendments. And if we need to do that in the coming year, we'll be able to do so this simply. So the vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham.
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig.
Yes.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is I-6, approval of the Troy Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, TBRA, proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget and 3-year budget. And I'll hand it over to City Manager Miller for the introduction.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a series of 3 tax increment financing authority budgets, the BRA being the first one. We had a question from a council member about what TIFs are, and we have a few new council members. So I was asked to give a summary of what tax increment financing is. I'll do that, but then understand each authority has a very specific arena that they work in and deal in. So tax increment financing is a concept whereby when the financing is approved, there is the base that creates a base taxable value, assessed value, excuse me. And as time goes forward and that assessed and taxable value goes up, that's considered new investment, and then that is captured for use for that taxing authority's purpose. Now, each authority captures slightly different taxing jurisdiction authority, taxing jurisdictions, millages. In fact, some of our TIFs actually capture other taxing jurisdictions, not just the cities. So I'm going to now introduce Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. You may be surprised to realize or learn that the whole city is one brownfield. And the way that it works is that by properties, the brownfield law can apply and the tax increment findings to that one property. So generally, brownfield is used to clean up sites, contamination, and a brownfield plan is created. And then that creates a baseline study for what used to be the DEQ, which is what Eagle now, to make sure that that site is cleaned up and then monitored appropriately. But what it also does, it gives a mechanism to clean up that site and then use the new tax capture to pay eligible expenditures to the developer. Also recently, which not that recently, but in the past decade, the Brownfield law was to allow the tax capture to be used for the demolition of economically and functionally obsolete buildings. And so many of the plans that we receive have that aspect to it too, older industrial buildings. We also, as part of it, have a revolving loan fund, which was built up by the redevelopment of Coolidge and Maple, Midtown, which was the old Ford New Holland plant. And so then that created a revolving loan fund, which MJR is utilizing and paying back now. So I'll kind of summarize what the BRA plan, the BRA budget has. But I wanted to note that on June 2nd, the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority did recommend approval of the budget. So revenues come in for each property, and that is TCF Bank, which is over at Maple and Coolidge, and that really is not much capture. It's only about $3,000. MJR's tax capture is just under $79,000. And then the Somerset shops, which is Maple and Coolidge, where First Watch is at, and it's being renovated. They're just starting to generate dollars. We're projecting just over $12,000 that would capture, that would be used to repay back their eligible expenditures. Then we have Uptown Apartments, which are not projected yet to have any capture. The Harrison Troy PS Apartments, they're not projected in the next fiscal year to have capture. That's dependent on them starting construction. So then for expenditures, we have about $5,700 in administrative expenses, just under $2,000 for audit fees. And then we may, from captured taxes from that individual property, we project to pay TCF Bank $3,380. We don't make a payment directly to MJR because they had a loan, and the repayment, the capture goes to the loan. Somerset Shops is projected at $12,250, and for the two apartments, they're not projecting any capture in this coming year, so therefore we wouldn't pay them anyway, but there is off in the future. I would like to note that the revolving loan fund, and when the tax capture comes in on the MJR property, it goes into this revolving loan fund. We have at the end of this fiscal year just over $420,000, and at the end of next fiscal year will be just under $500,000, which will be available for Glenn Lapin to work with somebody if they want to utilize the loan aspect. And just really quick, I want to demonstrate which taxing jurisdictions that this captures. It includes the city less debt service, the county millage, community college millage, Oakland County Transportation, and the intermediate school district. Where we recommend approval along with the Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, and I'll answer any questions that you have.
Any questions for city management? I know some were asked in email before, and we've addressed some of those. Councilmember Chamberlain-Kringa.
City Manager Miller, so kind of a question, comment, something that has helped me as I try to understand TIFs, and I just want to double check to make sure this is correct, and is when you look at with TIFs, with these TIF entities, essentially, is it true that across all of them, that for the base value, that still goes to the city, but it's that difference between the base and that growth, that is what is going back to the TIF entity. But to not forget, the city is still getting the tax from that base value. Is that correct across all of the TIF entities we're talking about?
Unequivocally, yes, you have it correct. So what the new investment goes to the applicant of the TIF.
And if I remember from the DDA, because I remember I spent a lot of time when I was serving in the DDA diving into TIFs, is that for the DDA, we're not taking any money from the schools. We don't, the DDA does not hold money from the schools. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we can look at that when we present the DDA, and I'll demonstrate every single taxing jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Someone like to move the resolution? Councilmember Chamberlain-Krianga.
I will dive in and move. So I'll move approval of the Troy Brownfield Redevelopment Authority proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget and 3-year budget as printed.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Chamberlain-Krianga. I will say supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt. And that we approve I6, approval of the Troy Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, TBRA, proposed fiscal year 2020-2021 budget and 3-year budget as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion? No, I thank you, Mark, for explaining a somewhat complex formula, and it's not always the most exciting, but it really is good for the city. It's good for the entities that are using it. It's a win-win for all of us. So we appreciate that. I appreciate you taking the time to do that explanation. The vote, Ms. Dixon?
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Krianga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is I7, approval of the Joint Local Development Finance Authority Troy Subcommittee proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget and 3-year budget. Also be introduced by City Manager Mark Miller. I'll turn it over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, this is a complex one too. In the early 2000s, some of you remember Doug Smith, who worked for the city, worked with Oakland County to get Automation Alley to locate in the city of Troy. And we were looking for, they were looking for a funding source to help Automation Alley out because initially it was a department of the county. And so there were smart zones, but the state only enabled so many of them throughout the state. So we created a joint smart zone with the city of Southfield. So technically this is the subcommittee of that smart zone. So that allowed us to create the smart zone, which then enabled us to create the Local Development Finance Authority, which is TIF. And this is generally in the industrial properties surrounding Automation Alley over at Big Beaver in Bellingham, and somewhat to the corner of John R. Also, this was projected to expire, and state law was changed, and Southfield and Troy were able to strike up a deal with the city of Port Huron to create a satellite smart zone. So that allowed us to extend this LDFA another 15 years. If you look at it, there is really only modest captures, and this has been really impacted by the elimination of industrial real estate property taxes. We do get a reimbursement from the state, but when that happened, it really reduced what we captured. And so that I'll go through the revenues, and then at Expenditures talk about the purpose of this LDFA. I mean, it's specifically for Automation Alley. So we bring in the next fiscal year about $173,600 of property taxes. And let me look really quick at the taxing jurisdictions. They include Oakland County, City Less Debt, and OCPTA, Oakland County ETA. See, not sure. There is half a school operating, 9 mills, ISD, half, community college, full harmless state education. So there is some state education tax capture in the LDFA. But it also in the revenues, it includes state revenue sharing of $40,000, which is an estimate. And that is supposed to make up for the elimination of the industrial real personal property tax. And then there's some minor investment income. So 60% of the capture goes to Automation Alley for operations. The remaining 40% is split up between infrastructure improvements, and currently we're assisting Automation Alley in repairing their parking lot. We have also done road work in Big Beaver and also Bellingham as an example. We also pay $5,000 of administrative services to the city. We pay a membership, the highest level of membership at Automation Alley of $17,500. And then there's some minor marketing costs of about $2,000 and then audit fees. With that, the LDFA did recommend approval on June 4th, and management also recommends approval of this budget.
Any questions for city management? No. All right. Someone like to move the resolution? Councilmember Hoderick?
I will move I-7, approval of the Joint Local Development Finance Authority Troy Subcommittee proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget and 3-year budget as printed.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Hoderick, supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt, that we approve I-7, approval of the Joint Local Development Finance Authority Troy Subcommittee proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget and 3-year budget as printed. Discussion. Again, Mark, thanks for the explanation and the little bit of background there, and always good. So thank you, appreciate that. The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Hoderick,
Yes.
Mayor Baker,
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham,
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks,
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Kranga,
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
Yes.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is I-8, approval of the Troy Downtown Development Authority, TDDA, proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget and 3-year budget, again introduced by City Manager Mark Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. The DDA was created in the early 90s, 1993, 1994, and over the years it has helped build many things. Somerset North, the parking deck, and you will notice that there's a revenue of $4 million, which is directly for that. It also helped pay for all of the Big Beaver Road improvements to get to the full width. Also if you notice along Big Beaver, it's the only road around where the electrical wires are underground, which makes a big difference. It also assisted in paying for the community center, which is in the DDA. In your packet, in the questions, there was a map of where the DDA, where it exists. It basically goes from Coolidge Road along Big Beaver all the way to Rochester Road, and there's some variations in it. So in the response to the Great Recession, the DDA had their own bonds. However, the revenues were falling at such a level because 7 or 8 properties in the DDA, their taxable value, went below the base value. And so it's computed in aggregate. So it brought all of the capture down below the base of the whole district. And back in 2000, God, it's getting to be a long time now. What was it, 2012-ish? We worked with the DDA and City Council, and we were able to use the city's full faith and credit and triple bond rating, and we were able to pay off the DDA's bonds and then create new bonds in conjunction with the city. But what's really important to note is that the TIF plan and all the documents say that the tax capture is dedicated first to the payment of those bonds. And then the life of the DDA was extended to, I think, 2032 or 2033. And so therefore, what we did actually is starting to work fairly well. And we have also now revised the plan so that there are minor marketing costs are permitted. Also, corridor maintenance, lawn cutting, repairing, things of that nature is happening. And then a year or two ago, maybe a little bit longer than that, we created the Quality Development Initiative, and we had to revise the plan to demonstrate that. And what that does is, for a mixed-use project, a developer can apply and get approved to be able to utilize 60% of the new capture to help pay for parking decks or stormwater detention. And only one property is using that right now, and that's 888 Big Beaver, which did the improvements to the office building and built the deck, put the retail out front, and now they're building the apartments. With that, I'll jump right into the actual budget. The property tax revenue is $1.79 million. Also in this fiscal year coming up, we have $4,035,175 projected as a parking deck payment from the Forbes Company, and then interest income of $10,000. Expenditures include $27,000 for administrative expenses and audit fees at $3,000, tax tribunal $25,000. The QDI payments are $30,250, and then that would go to Unicor's subsidiary company. Big Beaver maintenance is just over $338,000, and then servicing of bond series 2013 is just over $1 million in payments, and then marketing costs $25,000, and then other $1,200. That $4 million will go into fund balance, and if you recall, at the last meeting, council authorized me as the executive director of the DDA to execute any documents which city attorney Lori Bloom is working on related to the transfer of that property and the payment. Then we're going to come back afterwards and look at how those funds can be utilized, because there are conditions, and I don't know if the city attorney wants to comment on that a little bit.
Mayor, just to add that there are some restrictions, of course, and obviously the primary objective is to make sure that the bonds that City Council has, that the city has put its full faith and credit behind, will be satisfied. So obviously a $4 million influx of cash will be very nice, but it'll be sitting there until there are decisions made. And of course, they will be made in accordance with the Open Meetings Act for the DDA.
Thank you.
There was a question that came up earlier today by one council member, and unlike the general fund where council has adopted a policy of 20 to 30% fund balance, we don't have a corresponding policy for any of the TIF groups. I would say that the fund balance goes up quite a bit, even with that 4 million. So I'm putting Rob, our Chief Financial Officer, on the spot a little bit. Rob, do you have any comments? Do you want to talk a little bit about fund balances for other types of authorities that the city's involved with?
Sure. So basically, I think Lori said it quite well, is that we're going to analyze this first, the DDA, and we're going to come up with a plan. But the number one priority is to pay off the debt. So until we get to that point, there's also, we're looking into refinancing the debt with lower interest rates as well. So we're going to couple those two items, and then there'll be a plan for that. As it specifically is about fund balance, Mark, you know, with the DDA, it's much different than the general fund, because the general fund can be hit by many different things at many different times. And I think you'll see that in our report later, like Parks and Recreation, and that drag on our revenues. This is a little bit different. And so the idea is to grow this fund balance and then come up with something that can impact the community, some form of project that can impact the community. So in other words, growing this fund balance is not a bad thing.
Mayor, and in conclusion, I just want to note the taxing jurisdictions which the tax capture comes from. That includes Oakland County at 4.4846 mils, Oakland Community College at 1.5303 mils, City of Troy 9.9991, for a total of 16.014 mils of capture. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for city management? Councilmember Chamberlain Krienga.
Thank you so much, Mayor. So I'm glad to hear that we're looking to refinance that debt. I had wondered about that given the new rates that we have right now. And I was going to ask about that $4 million. Could that be used towards other things, or must it be used to service the debt? But it's good to hear that, just wanting to think about the financial health of the DDA, that it may need to service that debt first and foremost. The two questions I had was, I know City Manager Miller, you mentioned the QDI. Have we had any other interest in the QDI from other developers since it has been, since we approved that? I remember during that time when I was serving on the DDA when that was approved. So as the first question. And the second was around remembering we had to approve the plan to be able to use resources towards marketing, and was wondering if anything has moved forward. Because I know when I was on the DDA, nothing had quite moved forward. There was talk about using those resources around marketing, given that the Big Beaver corridor would be hard hit with all the construction. But now we've had a pandemic, and just wondering, is there any, could any of those resources be used for marketing purposes to kind of help our Big Beaver corridor, which includes both small businesses and larger businesses along the Big Beaver corridor? So I don't know if there's been any discussion among DDA members about actually tapping into some of those marketing resources that are available.
Mayor? Yes, to answer your first question, we have had some interest in the QDI. Nothing has finalized on any new projects, but there is some interest. Secondly, at the last DDA meeting, there was discussion about marketing. What we'll do is we'll provide you a little report. We could do it separately before the next agenda, or we can put it on the agenda if you want it to be in the public realm.
There was, if I can't, that meeting, the DDA meeting that happened, I think it was last week, that's on YouTube now, right? It's a requirement. So there was a discussion about the marketing a little bit. So if you haven't seen it, you can look at it on YouTube, and you'll see some of the thinking along those lines as a primer to the report that Mark was talking about. But it did come up some, and will come. The excitement is, yes, it's going to continue to be discussed because we are in a different setting now than we were prior, and it's something needs to be worked out. So, yes.
Excellent.
All right. Any other questions on I-7? I'm sorry, I-8? Somebody like to move this resolution? Councilmember Chamberlain Krienga.
I will move approval of the Troy Downtown Development Authority proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget and 3-year budget as printed.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Chamberlain Krienga, supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt, that we approve I-8, approval of the Troy Downtown Development Authority, TDDA, proposed fiscal year 2020-21 budget and 3-year budget as printed in the agenda. Any discussion? Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Yes, I just wanted to thank City Manager Mark Miller and some other council members who listened to me over the weekend as I struggled to understand what a TIF was, and more importantly, to really get a grasp on our DDA. It is a complicated entity and mechanism, and I really appreciate all the hand holding that went on. Numbers are not my forte, so just thank you for all the hard work that you do to make sure that everything stays on track. And I do absolutely appreciate the need to make sure that that debt is serviced and we maintain our bond rating. So thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
I just wanted to echo that. Thank you to Rob Melzik for you and your team's hard work on this. In particular, thank you for looking into refinancing these bonds, given the opportunity we have right now of very low bond rates. The reason why so many, the mayor and so many council members here talk about our AAA bond rating is when opportunities like this come up, and a bond that we issued 7 years ago, we can suddenly reissue it with a very favorable interest rate and save our residents money. And that's why it's such an important thing to be financially strong. And so this is an opportunity to do that. And I look forward to the further discussion on refinancing those bonds. So thank you very much for this.
Anybody else? All right, again, thank you, Mark. Echoing what everybody said. Good explanation. And the vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker,
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham,
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks,
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Craig,
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton,
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Yes.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is I-9, library funding discussion. Excuse me, library funding discussion. I see Bob Bruner has come back on, and here comes Kathy Russ as well. We had a late submittal of a presentation that was uploaded. I hope all of you got that in an email as well earlier. And I will turn it over to Assistant City Manager Bob Bruner to introduce this item. Oh, there we go.
Thank you. I give IT a moment to get the presentation up. All right, go ahead and advance to the next slide. Okay, so tonight, like we did a couple weeks ago with the special meeting, we're going to talk about library funding. We're going to talk about the current funding, needs and wants for the library in the future, what millage rate it would take to fulfill those needs and wants, and then potential term for that millage rate and the next steps we're going to take between now and August. Let's go ahead, next slide. Next. So currently, more than 90% of funding comes from the library millage, and everything else accounts for less than 10%, penal fines, overdue fines, state aid, that sort of thing. And we think those are going to continue to go down, trend down. Penal fines and state aid are likely to be reduced due to state budget cuts. You know, the state's much more reliant on income taxes and other forms of taxes that different from the city. And the state has a long history of balancing their budget at the expense of local governments. So there's good reason to believe that will continue. And then there's also just changes in the technology and the offerings at the library that with the popularity of ebooks, it reduces fine accrual, and you don't have fines. So continuing to rely on this funding will make the library vulnerable to service reductions in the future, which is something that we don't want, as we talked about last time. And so I said it's the icing, this other funding is the icing and not the cake. And then the next slide, you'll see why. there's your orange icing on the blue cake that is library tax revenue. Next slide. So currently with operations, the current library millage, which has been rolled back from 7/10 now to about 0.6805, doesn't cover the full cost of operating the library, even at the current 55 hours a week, 6-day a week level. The budget that council's approved for the coming fiscal year that starts July 1 includes total expenditures of $4.128 million. That's the equivalent to about 0.8 of a mil. And so library property taxes are budgeted to cover approximately 84% of that. The library fund balance is budgeted to cover nearly 10% of expenditures. And then those other revenues I just talked about actually come in third place. They're budgeted for to cover about 7% of expenditures. And again, this is a budget subject to change. We'll see what actually happens during the course of the fiscal year. Next slide, please. Maintenance is a big issue. We talked about it back during the special meeting. The city's invested approximately $2.8 million in building maintenance and upgrades since the library millage began. That is an average of about $300,000 a year, but it hasn't been consistent over that period of time. In 1 year, for example, the current fiscal year, the fiscal year that's about to end, the capital project fund funded $1.2 million for renovation and roof replacement. And so there's other years where we spend tens of thousands of dollars on maintenance and repairs, like the coming fiscal year where there's only $48,000 in the budget. And that's not because there aren't needs. There was another $228,000 worth of maintenance that was proposed for the coming fiscal year that's been deferred because of slide, please. So this is the same chart we looked at during the special meeting. It shows how library fund revenues, or the blue line, pretty flat during the last 10 years. Library fund expenditures have crept up over that period of time as the cost of doing business has increased. And then the gray triangle shows how the additional funding from the capital projects fund peaked library expenditures even further. And then the yellow line, you see how the fund balance initially was built up over the course of the first few years. And now in the coming fiscal year will essentially be spent down to nearly zero. Next slide. So now let's talk about what the library needs and what the city council and the community wants for the library in the future. Next slide. So the needs are got to have a building to have a library, and you got to have a collection to have a library. If you don't have a building with a collection, then there's really no point in having a library. And we need to restore the fund balance as well. Doing that will help reduce the library's vulnerability to future service reductions when there's increase in costs or decreases in revenues, quote unquote, rainy days. And we talked a little bit about this during the special meeting, that if the library fund does not have its own fund balance, then that puts the library in competition with other priorities throughout the city. And, you know, that's a competition that the library may lose. So by having the library fund have a healthy fund balance, it helps ensure that the library is less vulnerable to those pressures in the future. We talked about the age of the building. It's just 1 year younger than Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, I believe, from our last conversation. The facility requires significant investment, both capital and non-capital maintenance, which just talked about the history there. So these are really things that need to be funded in order to continue to have a library. Next slide, please. And then these are some wants. This is certainly not an exhaustive list of wants, but based on the conversation during the special meeting, we heard a lot about hours and the desire to restore the library to its 7-day service. Back before the recession, when hours were reduced in July 2010, the library was open on Fridays. It was open 7 days a week and 65 hours a week. And that's about on par with the average of other libraries in our area when we looked prior to the pandemic. And so that's a big desire within the community and on the council. And then we also talked about the need for upgrading the facilities, not just maintenance, but replacing some of the 34-year-old furniture and that sort of thing. And so, like I said, there's certainly a lot of other things that could go on this list, but talk about them in general terms. These are the wants for the library. Next slide, please. So this was, and I mentioned Drew carried a lot of the water on the survey item. I have to apologize that Stephanie from our office didn't get a chance to make a better graphic for this slide prior to the meeting. So this is basic PowerPoint clip art, but this is inspired by basically, the needs hierarchy. This is your library needs hierarchy. You need that fund balance, you need to fund the maintenance. We have to have a collection to have a library. And then there's demand for staffing for 7-day service, and then upgrades on top of that. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the millage rate necessary to support that. Next, please. So these are some considerations as we talk about the millage rate. First is that the current millage rate's not sustainable for the reasons we just talked about. We're spending down the fund balance, we're spending more money on the library than the current millage rate generates. So therefore, the library rate must increase in order to sustain the library. And so it's got to meet the library's needs, and it may also provide for the library's wants. Council may levy less than the maximum approved by voters, something that we talked about during the special meeting. And the millage rate will eventually be rolled back at some point in the future when property values increase faster than inflation. So these are kind of just general considerations before we dive into specifics. Next slide. So this is our current baseline. Like I mentioned before, the coming fiscal year, we're going to spend the equivalent of about 0.8 of a mil, $4.1 million. So right off the bat, we know that that's not a sustainable solution to put on the ballot. Next slide, please. And so we looked at 0.9 of a mil and a mil, and turns out that option A, 0.9 of a mil, provides for the library's needs, and then option B, the whole mil, provides for both needs and wants. So go ahead to the next slide. Let's see a side-by-side comparison here. See option A, you got, and this is probably pretty small, depending on what size monitor you're watching at, but this presentation is available on the city's website. If anybody at home is watching, go to the city council page. It's late submittal on the meeting archive. So basically what this shows the difference between A and B meeting the needs and getting the wants. Major difference here is the cost of 6-day service versus 7-day service. Next slide. So this is what I call my reality check slide. And this doesn't include all the data that we collected. And I have to, again, give thanks to Nino Licari, our city assessor, for helping me collect this data. What we did here is we took the average taxable value of a residential parcel in all the communities in Oakland County that levy a library tax, and the library millage rate to calculate the average residential library taxes. So at the end of this presentation, there's another version of this chart which actually has all the communities in Oakland County, class 5 and 6 libraries that levy a property tax. But here, in order that you might be able to read it a little bit better, it's just kind of selected some libraries across the range from lowest to highest. So Pontiac has the lowest average library tax, $15 per household. Bloomfield Township has the highest, $471. And then there's a lot of points in between. But the county average is $128 per household. You can see Troy, our current 0.6 of a mil. We're down there in the blue bar on the right-hand side of the chart at $85 a household. And then you can see the 0.9 of a mil option moves us to the left a little bit. The 1 mil moves us left pretty close to the average. County average is $128 a year. 1 mil is about $124 a year. And then, although I didn't include more information in the presentation, I thought the question might come up as like, well, what does 1.1 mil look like? And so you can see that here. It still doesn't push us anywhere near the high end of the spectrum for the millage rates. Next slide, please. So in addition to the millage rate, City Council also needs to determine the duration. Next slide. In the past, the City Council has approved ballot language for a 5-year term. That's now been presented to voters twice and approved. So we have a total now of 10 years. And 10 years is actually a pretty common term for library millages in Oakland County. This table shows library elections in Oakland County from 2012 through 2018. You can see that there was one in Brandon Township that was approved in perpetuity. There's several at 10 years, 8 years, a couple at 6, and Troy is the only, in addition to Troy, Holly Township Library is the only other library that had a 5-year term. So the choice is yours, but this is evidence to suggest maybe a longer term may be in order. The trade-off here is really, the longer the term, the better we can plan for the future. But potentially the less likely voters will be to approve it. Next slide. So our next steps. Next slide. Public engagement. We touched on this earlier, and since the agreements with Cobalt were approved, we will have a kickoff meeting with Cobalt tomorrow afternoon at 10 to talk about the library survey. And that's going to be our top priority because that's going to be the most time consuming. And it's also going to be one of the ways that people can provide input on their own time and on their own terms without having to quote unquote, show up for a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting. So that's really our top priority. And then a virtual focus group or multiple groups, depending on how quickly we can move. and a virtual town hall meeting, which, as we discussed during the special meeting, would be an opportunity for city staff to present information in an online format like this, but then also for the public to be able to ask questions and provide input. It's a format that our library director, Kathy Russ, affectionately refers to as Stump the Chump. Now, City Council, for its part, has to choose the library millage rate and the duration and approve ballot wording before Tuesday, August 11th. That's a statutory deadline that we can't change. So we'll be working on public engagement as quickly as we can in order to provide City Council input for you to make a decision before then. And then the next two slides, go ahead to the next one. Like I said, this is the complete data set of the average residential library taxes. This is all class 5 and 6 libraries in Oakland County. You download a copy from the website, and it's got the same information on it that we just talked about during the presentation, but there's even more communities listed on here. But the top and the bottom and the average are all the same. It's also presented in a less rectangular, this is a 8.5 by 11. So it's not as stretched out from left to right, so it may look a little bit different. And then next slide. This is just different version of the same table we already looked at, where reduce the number of data points in order to try to make it easier to read. But it's pretty difficult here in the meeting to see on the screen. So I hope you all take the time to download a copy of the presentation and look at the information. And again, much thanks to Nino for helping me collect the data. You know, this is all public information, but it's not something that's posted on a website and easily retrievable. So we had to collect the data and put it into Excel in order to do these calculations and create these charts. But obviously, this is an important reality check to ensure that whatever millage rate you decide to put on the ballot question is consistent with what other communities in the county are paying. So that's the presentation for tonight. There's no action tonight, but obviously this is part of a kind of ongoing conversation. So we listened during the special meeting when we talked about library funding and tried to create a presentation that was responsive to that and give you some new information now for you to ask more questions and digest, so that when we come back to the next regular meeting, we'll kind of have this iterative process until City Council is ready to adopt a rate and duration. So with that, we can close the presentation, and I'll be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thank you, Bob. And just as a reminder, so we're not expected tonight, everybody, to give direction as to what we want the millage rate to be or the term. In fact, I wouldn't recommend anyone trying to do anything like that tonight, because we haven't done our survey work yet in our public community engagement. So you may have some strong thoughts already, and I know I do, and I get that, but let's try to remember that we're just one piece of this puzzle. There, I've said my piece on that one, but I appreciate, now it's our turn to try to stump the chump, Bob, and in this setting, because you're giving us that opportunity. So I saw Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton's hand go up. We'll go and start with you.
Thanks, Mayor, and thank you, Bob, for all your research, hard work and research on this. Really well presented. Just to let residents know, what this is targeting is for the millage that will be enacted and levied in 2021. So for likely summer of 2021, for the July 1st, 2021 fiscal year to 22. Because the current library millage expires about a year from now, and the funding would expire too. So we're still currently in the fiscal year 20 budget for the next week, And so just to put it in perspective for our residents, if we did nothing and we didn't renew the library millage at all, of course, we'd have to shut down the library. But our city's millage rate from the fiscal year 20 to the fiscal year 22 budget will drop 1.3051 already with us doing nothing. And that's due to head lead drops. That's due to our full debt millage being paid off. And that's due to the library millage falling off. Now from the fiscal year 2021 budget, which we just passed a few weeks ago, which will start in a week, if we do nothing and the library millage falls and we have to close the library, our city millage rate will drop 1.0605 no matter what if we do nothing. So even if we were to enact 1 mil or 0.9 mils, we would still give residents a lower city tax rate despite increasing the funding for our library, because we are paying off debt millage from 20 years ago when I was still in high school in Troy. So we're in such I said this earlier with our RRR bond rating, but our city really is in such a good financial position that we could increase the funding of the library, but reduce or maintain our overall tax rate and significantly reduce it from the budget we're still on right now for the next week. So just to put it in perspective, the numbers we're talking here, it's really remarkable what the prudent fiscal management of the city is allowing. So just to put that in perspective. I don't have any questions for you, Bob. I just wanted to get that point out.
Thank you. Next. Wow. Oh, Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. In terms of the next steps, there was the virtual focus groups and the virtual town halls, and I'm hoping that for the next council meeting, we'll hear a little bit more about how those focus groups, how the town halls will be run, what dates we're looking at. I suspect we're going to have a lot of interest, people who are keenly interested, and I think the sooner we can get that information out, the better. So I believe the next meeting would be July 13th, and my question is it realistic and feasible to have that information to convey at the next council meeting?
If your question is information about our plans to convey at that time, then yes. I don't know if we'll have conducted a focus group by then yet or not. The reason that the presentation is a late submittal today is because I was literally working on it until today. And so a lot of this research will provide, is basically the raw material for the focus groups and virtual town hall meeting. So now as we're going to pivot from the research phase and go into the engagement phase. So yeah, we'll have plans to share by the next council meeting. I don't know if we'll have any results to share.
If I may, I totally recognize that the results, it'd be unrealistic to assume that in 2 weeks. I was more interested in being able to communicate the plan, because there are many that would want to be at a town hall or want to be part of a focus group. And I want to make sure that there's ample time to let residents know, get that communicated, and then we can get really good, robust discussions and participation.
I'd like to ask a follow-up on that, if I could, just quickly. So our next meeting is not till July 13th. That's 3 weeks from now. We have that meeting on the 13th, the meeting on the 27th of July, and then we have one more meeting before our drop dead deadline of having to have ballot language approved. Is it realistic? I guess my question is, do we need to have a council action or resolution to authorize that town hall, assuming most of us will probably want to be there in some form if it can't be in person? I know if it was at like the library, the community center, we would just show up and not have it be a special meeting. But if we do it virtually and say more than 3 of us want to be a part of that, do we need to have a special meeting set? And if that's the case, if we have to wait 3 weeks till our next meeting to even be able to make an authorization of that nature, is that going to make it too late before we can get it scheduled and properly publicized Is there anything we can do tonight to give consensus or give some kind of authorization to head in that direction? Does that help or does that hurt? Or I don't know if City Attorney Bloom, I spoke a little bit probably in your realm, if you want to take the first step.
Yeah, so Mayor, you do have the ability to call a special meeting if it does become necessary. And obviously the first step is to meet tomorrow, with Cobalt, first and foremost. So it is something that, certainly to be conservative, it would be my preference to actually post it as a special meeting. Just again, erring on being the most conservative that we can be. But obviously, if there's no deliberation, it'd be more like a social event. But again, it'd be my recommendation that you do post it, but that can be done a number of different ways. So it doesn't necessarily require you actually taking that action tonight.
Okay, yeah, as I recall, either I can call a special meeting or 2 council members can, so you don't need anything done to do that. As long as it can be done that way, that's fine. I just, to Council Member Abraham's point, the publicizing of that meeting and that opportunity for public engagement, I think is going to be very important. And I want to make sure we have ample time to get proper publicity put out, and also ample time then to take any data and any information gleaned from that before we have to make our last minute decision, or what seemingly looks like a last minute decision. So I think that covers everything though on that. I appreciate that. Additional comments or questions? Councilmember Chamberlain-Crango?
Thank you, Mayor. So I have a couple of questions, but I did want to follow up on a follow-up around the town hall meeting. So Cobalt, as I understand it, they will lead the focus groups, is that correct? And then is city management going to lead the town hall meetings, or is Cobalt leading all of that?
Yeah, we'll talk about that tomorrow when we have the kickoff meeting with Cobalt in terms of who's doing what.
Okay, just was wondered how that worked with the budget, because I didn't see the town hall meetings in the contract or the proposal, but it's good. It's excellent. We're doing them for sure. The questions I wanted to ask is around, and thank you so much for this hard work that's been done on this presentation. It's illuminated a lot more for me as well, is around option A and B. Presuming do they both factor in a possible Headley rollback? And is it possible to be able to determine, say over a 5-year period, what that rollback could look like? So say if it is 0.9, and yes, as you pointed out, that just meets the needs, not needs and wants, but being able to know in 5 years time, what might that be rolled back to if Headley applies in that case? So that was one question is, do they still meet the needs in one case and needs and wants in the 1.0 mil case, kind of assuming they factor in Headley, and do they factor in Headley? The other question I was trying to grapple with is around duration. And is there any argument to be made that a shorter duration just helps to encompass any uncertainties about the future? Say if you have a duration of 10 years, but you find that the millage rate you've passed is not sufficient within 5 years, or due to Headley, it just quickly does not become sufficient. Does it ever are you locked in a sense? And then that could be an argument for having a shorter period of time. Just wanted to throw that out there just to understand that. And is there any correlation between the ways in which libraries are established? So we talked in our special meeting about the different ways in which libraries are formed, and the length of that, the length of the millage rate that is there. Like say if there is a independent board, does that tend to be potentially a longer rate, because maybe there is more, assuming maybe this board is closer to the people in some way as opposed to another form, just as a hypothesis if that was out there. So I don't know if there's any correlation. I'm not sure about all those examples listed, which one is correlates to our current library, which I know we want to move forward in the current form. And there's a report that explains, I think, convincingly to me why that's seems to make sense, but just wondered around the data with that. And yeah, those are the main questions for now. I'm sure I'll have more, but can always send some in.
Bob, do you have, if we were a lawyer, we'd object to that as a compound question, Rebecca, but that's it's okay. I hope Bob got them all down. They're good ones, but don't you got them, right? Before you forget, go ahead.
I heard three things, and I'll do them in reverse order. There's certainly no legal difference in terms of how a library is formed and how long the millage duration can be. So the city is not limited. City council is not limited by the library millage duration in a way that independent library board would be. And I haven't looked at those specific millages to pick out, how the library was established, but there's no practical difference between one or the other. And then I lost the second question. The first one was Headley. What was the second one?
The second was, and with the last one, oh, go ahead.
I think if I remember, it was whether if the millage essentially didn't meet the needs halfway through, is it worth having a shorter term? Is that about right?
That's correct. Thank you.
Yeah, and what I was going to say about that is you could put a question on the ballot every year. You put it on the ballot 4 times a year at every election. So we're certainly not locked into a 10-year term or a 5-year term. As a practical matter, because Troy has had 5-year terms, that's pretty short. So the city's been consistently kind of, at the latter end. But if the voters were to approve a 10-year term or some other longer term, then you could have a Headley rollback election to at some point before that term was over. So that's not a problem. And then the first question, so the answer to the first question is that, if I had a crystal ball and I could predict the future, I would be picking winning lottery numbers or something instead of being the assistant city managers. So what I can say about the scenarios that I've presented is that those are conservative numbers. They're based on the city's taxable value last year, and barring recession or some other major trouble, the city's taxable value will continue to increase, and then it's when the value increases faster than inflation that the rollback kicks in. So, and you can kind of look, at that revenue, that chart that I had, revenues and expenditures. You can kind of see how revenue is pretty flat, just kind of creeps up a little bit, and that's what Headley and Proposal A do. Is they allow a little bit of revenue growth, basically just inflation. So at some point, there will probably be a need for a Headley rollback or a new millage. But like I said, these they're conservative. They're based on the numbers as they are today. But it's really difficult for me to predict how long or how many years it'll be until we're in a similar situation where we need to increase the rate.
Thank you, City Manager Miller, and then Kathy. I think I saw your hand go up too.
Thank you, Mayor. The one thing I will note, working for the city for both of these millage, 5 years just doesn't seem like a very long time. It almost is like a blink and you're redoing it. And I think Kathy would agree with me.
Kathy?
Thank you, Mayor. And actually, thank you, Mark, because that's exactly what I was going to say. Several of you have been through this process with me before, and you finish one millage and you're right into the next one. I mean, it's really, truly within 2 years. And I think Mark would also agree, City Manager Miller would also agree, that the shorter the duration, it's very hard to plan, especially for capital repairs. Because what happens is you could have a building report the way that we do that projects out 10 years, but if your millage duration is only 5 years, you don't know if you can do what you need to do in years 6, 7, 8, and so forth.
I think Bob, you pretty much said this, but the idea is if you have, say, a 10-year approval and you were worried about Headley issues, you're never precluded from going back and doing a correction if you need to. On the flip side, you see the detriment of having the shorter 5-year. It's harder to do the long-term planning and such. So keep that in mind, I guess, is the takeaway from that. Councilmember Chamberlain-Craig, did you have anything else?
That's great. Thank you so much. That was super helpful.
Anyone else? Any questions or comments? Councilmember Hoderick.
I have to get myself unmuted, sorry. There's also an option that we could say do 1.2 up to 1.2, but only levy 1, correct? We don't, although that gets confusing to the public when you're trying to help them understand what they're voting on. But, something to consider is the whole idea of creating that flexibility within our ability to manage in a fiscally responsible way for the 10-year period to build that into whatever millage rate we pick. That's something we could kick around, correct?
Yep.
Councilmember Erickson Gall.
Yeah, just following up on that a little bit and to make sure I understand, say we were to decide we wanted to go with 1 mil and we ended up the voters approved 1 mil and we decided as a council to levy actual 0.9, you would then have the option during that 10-year period to increase it to the 1 mil if the need arose. Is that correct?
Yes, with the caveat that if you start out with a 1 mil, the Headley maximum will eventually be less than 1 mil. So if voters approved a mil and you levied 9/10 of a mil the first year, whether or not you ever actually got to levy the whole mil that may not actually happen due to the Headley rollback. Conceptually, you've got it right, but that's one sticky detail.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me about the fun of Headley.
Do you have anything else, Dan?
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, saw your hand go up again.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one clarification. I know that what school funding does often for their operating budget is the state says you can't you can't levy more than 18 mils for school operating expenses. So what they did 2 years ago, I believe, is they had voters approve 21 mils, but with the caveat that they can't ever make it more than 18. So the 21 is your Headley max, but a caveat there was that you can't do more than 18 anyway. So that kind of gives you a little wiggle room with Headley. Could we add that requirement that you do a higher millage, but we as the city council are only authorized to do the lower? Is that something voters can specify? Because maybe if there's the protection, know that we could never levy the 1.2, we can only levy the 1, but Headley allows us to keep it at 1 rather than Headley adjusted. Is that, City Attorney Bloom, is that a possibility with us, or is that only a special thing that school boards can do due to the state requirement?
So the language, of course, is going to say up to whatever millage you pick. Drafting of that will be a challenge to make sure that the voters understand exactly what it is that they are voting on. You also have some limits in the charter as well, and of course under state law you can't levy just whatever you want. Obviously there are some limits that are imposed. So if that is what you want, we certainly can look into that further. We can see if that's a feasible option.
Yeah, I just confused. Like, is it just because there's a state statute on that, or is that something you do with any millage? Because I've only really seen it with the school board ones. So I'm just curious if that's an option. So thank you for your answer.
Interesting concept. I'll editorialize here for a second. My initial thought is the easier and cleaner and more simple we can make this, the better it will serve our community and its residents. But good questions to ask and good thought. I mean, but simplification, I think, probably is the key. And if you went through this before, and I see Councilmember Abraham nodding her head pretty big, she is probably, and Kathy, I'm sure you're thinking something along those lines. But it's nice to be creative, but sometimes it's hard to explain creative, I think, is the problem. So,
yeah.
And that can be detrimental in the end. Councilmember Hoderick?
Absolutely, I agree with that. I also, having been entangled with what Headley rollback does to us, we go to the voters, they vote for 0.7.
Is she frozen for everybody else, or is she frozen just for me? Okay. Councilmember Hoderick, if you can hear us, you have...
And we're not able to properly fund the library. We put our AAA bond rating at risk. It's frustrating. Oh, I'm sorry, could you not hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're a little choppy. I think your point was, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but hearing what we just said about that and the simplification, the importance also of getting stuck and hamstrung by having that Headley cap or the rollback, which then puts us in a bad situation right away, and then potentially puts our AAA bond rating at risk and the fiscal health of the library and the city. So while yes, simplification is good, you also want to make sure we're properly protecting our city's assets and our AAA bond rating and doing everything in a fiscally responsible way. Is that a good summation?
Exactly.
Okay, good. I speak Ellen. So
that's scary.
It's just scary to probably a lot of you watching, but at least we're all laughing. Councilmember Brooks, did you have anything? You haven't said anything yet. I hate to put you on the spot, but.
And my internet's kind of glitchy, so. Hello?
Yeah.
Can you guys hear? Okay. It's going in and out. That's why it's kind of hard, because every time I want to say something, it's at a little delay. But I think a big takeaway was what Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton pointed out, in that essentially, we could have, even if we vote for, or if we propose a mill of, 1.1 or 1.2, we could essentially lower our overall tax rate for our residents. So, we definitely want to do as much as we can for our library, because we obviously value education and access to education in our community. So, but I think it's important to hear what our residents want as well.
Very good. Good point. Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Yeah, just to follow up, and ultimately the choice is the voters. I mean, they have to decide on this. All our decision is what we present. The options that we give the voters is what we're doing here, and they can say yes or no, and whatever they decide in November is what we'll go with. So just to put that in perspective, it's definitely voters of Troy's decision.
Very good. Are you putting your hand up, Councilmember Hoderick? Okay.
Yeah, can I try again? Are you hearing me okay?
Yeah.
I appreciate Councilwoman Brooks emphasizing that. I mean, the fact is we're looking at the possibility of finally funding the library at a much more appropriate level, because it's been limp along since the get-go. That was a compromised level of millage that our library has functioned with. The idea that we could more properly fund it and essentially still be lowering the taxes of our residents is, a key message, a key takeaway of all our conversations between our last study session and here. And that's, that we could do right by the wallets of our residents. At the same time, we're doing right by this gem in our community that is much loved. You can tell that people just love it, and they don't understand the Headley rollback, and they don't understand how we ended out with only 0.7 to begin with, because it is so complicated, right? If we can get a level that's right and still protect their wallets, that's a win-win that, has me sleeping a little better at night just contemplating that. So thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, for your nerdy study of all of our budgets to help clarify that for us.
Very good. You've all said pieces of what my notes say on my paper in front of me that I took over the presentation and over this conversation. And I think that, the key for me is really thorough and effective communication with our residents, and not just one-way communication, but two-way communication. And we all recognize we're in a challenging time because of the COVID-19 and how we're doing these things. And it's summertime, and on one hand, a lot of people are at home looking for things to give input on. On the other hand, if people can get out of town, or if they're going to, and they're not going to be as heavily focused on this as maybe they should be. So we have to find a way to do an effective two-way communication on this process. I've been a proponent of a 7-day library for as long as I've been on council, and I've gone back and forth on how to get there. So this is one of the things that I think that I've heard a lot in certain circles that I've been in the city, and it's the notion of live within your means library, and don't come after us for more money, don't take money from here, don't do all of that. But I want to just talk a little bit about what that really means. And you look at, and we've got Kathy here, and maybe it'd be my time to stump the chump. But I would love to. We're down our 0.7 mils that we've approved is down to 0.6805, which it makes a big difference. And we talk about living within our means and what the library budget does. We know from presentations in the past, Kathy and everything, how many we've got a heavy focus on part-time employees at the library, which are greatly affected by what the minimum wage does. And that affects our use of the tax dollars to pay. So we right there between heavily rolling back and minimum wage rates going up, that shrinks the pot of available funding for our library to be efficiently. So when we're told to live within our means or to make do with what you have, I'm wondering, Kathy, if there's, and I don't want to put you on the spot here, and I don't want to look for anything too concrete, but if we were to try to operate the library strictly on what our millage provides at this 0.6805 without any additional funds from the city for the capital improvements that it needs, and what would that look like for the Troy Public Library? And I'm hoping that as part of the conversation with the surveying company, Cobalt, and as we work together with the community, that can be a part of the presentation as an explanation, as a comparison of what, so someone can't just say, well, use the money you have. Well, this is what it looks like to do that. Because I think a lot of people will get hung up on, oh, look, they're trying to expand service, they're trying to do these upgrades and all these things, but it's not just about that. It's about what kind of service we're going to provide to our residents with the library we have, and how quickly at risk that service is just by continuing as is. So I don't know, Kathy, if you could speak just for a minute about what that means. I'm sure you've thought about it, being the library director that you are, but if you could just touch on that for a second, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. It's actually not a difficult question to answer, because you've seen all the charts and the graphs and the fantastic information that Bob has been able to present, I think, so succinctly and so clearly. Is the library's current funding doesn't meet the library's needs. So if the library lived within its current means without there won't be a subsidy from the fund balance. There wouldn't be going forward, because at the end of next fiscal year, which is the end of the term of the millage, that fund balance would be exhausted. So what you're looking at is honestly a 5-day library. And then the question would become, which day do you want to cut? It would Monday through Thursday are 11-hour days of service. Saturday is a 7-hour day. Sunday is a 4-hour day, but we do probably a Saturday's worth of business in that 4 hours. So that would be the difficult decision that I would have to bring to city administration, certainly, and say, this is what we're looking at. Which day do you think is the best day to cut, and present evidence as to my recommendation. So that's my answer to that.
Well, that's a good answer, and I appreciate that. And I'm not certain that people want to pay an average of $12 or more to have a 7th day, but I'm pretty certain they don't want to cut their library down to 5 days. I think that would be a bad mark on our city, and not what Troy is about. So we do need to recognize that and work with that as we do the community engagement. Kathy, go ahead.
I can give you another example that's I think equally relevant given the time that we're in. As you know, the library has started curbside pickup of holds. The building itself is not open to the public, but you can place materials on hold and make an appointment, and we'll bring your materials out to the car. We are looking into phase 3, which is limited access to the building. But what we're struggling with is I don't know if I have the staff to do both. We'd like to do both because then people don't have to come into the building. But if we're running a robust curbside pickup business, and I have a lot of staff devoted to that, I will not then have the staff to cover the service desks inside the library. And that's just a function of having a staff that's 90% part-time. So, we're looking into that. We're going to do our best. That's also another reason why, our curbside is Monday through Thursday right now. We're adding Saturdays starting July 11th. But we wanted to start small and build rather than take on the world and have to pull back. And that's the situation that we find ourselves in very frequently, given the level of staffing.
Thank you. Any other thoughts from anybody? That we've all had quite a few comments and thoughts. I appreciate, Bob, very much your presentation, and for all the work that your team and city management's team has done, and Kathy, of course, being here and being available to us. And I know that it's important. These are good conversations we need to have, and we need to have a lot of them in a short period of time as we move forward. So if nobody, Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Yeah, just, our next council meeting is not for 3 weeks, so I'm sure you guys are already doing this, but I look forward to the results of tomorrow, to being updated on the results of tomorrow's meetings and as it progresses, and we may share that with residents who are interested. I'm sure we're getting emails already on this topic, so I look forward to the next 3 weeks as this goes about. We can share with the residents the progress and keep them updated, because it's going to be a long 3 weeks. A lot's going to happen until then, so I look forward to hearing that.
Very good. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Mark. Everybody else, I think this was a good discussion. I hope you got good information from us tonight to take forward into your meeting with Cobalt tomorrow. And they have a big job too, so I'm looking forward to it. So at this time, I'm going to call for a quick 5-minute recess, take a break. We haven't had a break in a virtual meeting, but I think this is a little bit longer meeting, so we'll take 5 minutes and we'll be back. I don't know what time it is, but in about 5 minutes, okay? Thank you. Back and we'll back to order here at the Troy City Council meeting. Next up on the agenda is the consent agenda. Would anybody like to pull any items from the consent agenda this evening? Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
I'll move all items on the consent agenda as printed in the packet.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt, that we approve all items on the consent agenda as printed. Any discussion? Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton.
I just wanted to mention J5, which was a request for approval of drive-through clerk's office and election update. I really want to thank City Clerk Dixon for her leadership on dealing with the first big election we're going to have under COVID-19 and under the new absentee ballot rules. What she's proposing is on Saturday, July 25th from 8 a.m. till 12 p.m., there'll be a drive-through clerk's office at City Hall, and I believe she's going to do it the subsequent weekend as well and at other times. So you'll be able to just drive through from your car, maybe register to vote, definitely get request an absentee ballot and vote the ballot there. So that is a fantastic option to allow people to vote safe. If Clerk Dixon, you want to elaborate on anything I said, I think it's just a fantastic thing, and I'm glad to support it.
I was going to ask City Clerk if she could speak about that a little bit, but also if you wouldn't mind just speaking in general a little bit about the August 4th election and information you have now or what your plans are. I was asked earlier if all the polling locations will be open on August 4th. If you could speak to that, I'd be greatly appreciative.
Thank you, Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem and Council. So first of all, yes, all 31 precincts will be open on Election Day at their normal polling locations. We are not consolidating or shutting down any precincts at all in Troy. The absentee counting board, as you know, last meeting, we moved the absentee counting board to the community center to allow for social distancing and to accommodate the ballots that we're expecting. We are prepared to provide PPE to all of our election workers, including the absentee counting board. All of the election workers in the precincts will have face shields, gloves, hand sanitizer, cleaning products to wipe down the surfaces. We've purchased special signage for inside the precincts and outside, reminding people to wear masks and social distance and keep their, wash their hands or use hand sanitizer. We've also provided the same stuff for the absentee counting board because even though the public is not allowed in there, there will be over 50 people in the absentee counting board. So we want to make sure that they're all safe as well. We are going to have them all social distanced. We're also going to have social distancing markers inside the polling locations. The voting booths will be social distanced. We're doing everything that we can to make sure that everyone that wants to vote in person or who wants to work for us will be safe, and as well as the staff and the people that are at the locations, because most of our locations are in churches, so they have their own staffing that will also be present. And I'm working closely with the representatives from those locations to make sure that they understand how we're going to be operating and that what their role to play is in making sure that everyone that enters the building is safe that day and can vote without worrying about the virus or crowds or whatever. So we're mitigating all of those challenges. We also have purchased additional drop boxes for outside City Hall, which got installed today, so we're very excited. And those will be able to accommodate the influx of absentee ballots that we receive. We do empty those boxes multiple times a day, but maybe on Saturday and Sunday, they could get filled up, so we wanted to make sure we had enough space for everyone. The state is offering, has an order form that I will be requesting supplies from. They can provide also masks, face shields, letter openers, touchless thermometers, all kinds of things on their order form. So I'll be taking advantage of that as well. And then as far as how the drive-up clerk's office will look, we have signs that we've purchased to put on Civic Center Drive and Town Center Drive that will direct people to the east parking lot. The east doors will not be accessible to the public, but the idea is that voters would stay in their cars, and staff members from the clerk's office will be inside the east lobby with everything needed to help people either register to vote or get their absentee ballots. People will drive up in their cars, stop right in front of the door. Someone from the clerk's office will come out and talk to them at a safe distance. The only handling would be taking the ID from the person or handing them a form, but there would not be any interaction closer than that. And then the voter would stay in their car. They could go park in a parking spot and vote their ballot if they wanted to, or take it home. And then they could return it to the drop box. So there would not be the need for another interaction with a clerk's office staff member. So we're limiting the amount of contact at all with any members of staff or with voters with each other. There won't be any voters in the building because City Hall is closed to the public, but we don't feel that there would be a need for the voters to enter City Hall anyway, because we'll be able to handle everything and answer all their questions right from the East lobby. We're going to be doing that on July 25th, and the following Saturday, August 1st, we're required by state law to be open. We'll be open from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and we plan on doing it the same way on that day. There's not a need to move everyone inside because we can do everything from the East lobby. So we feel that that's a safer way to handle ballots in general. And then during the day, during the weekdays, while City Hall is closed, we will also be handling absentee ballot issuing or registering to vote the same way. So if people call and they want to come and register to vote, they'll be able to come to City Hall, and we would meet them at the East stores, and they could drive up and we would be able to hand them the forms and they could hand them back to us or drop them in the drop box. So we're fully prepared to do all of that. And our top priority is making sure everyone still gets to cast their ballot, but also stays safe while they're doing it, and make sure that everyone that's working stays safe as well.
I think I can add another top priority, the security of the ballots and making sure everything's done under proper procedures. I know that goes without saying. We talked a little bit about it last time, but you're taking security very seriously. Obviously, I asked with regard to the community center aspects at the last meeting, but they'll be under all the normal protections, these ballots that, I don't want anyone to think that it's just cars driving through parking lots and ballots going everywhere. It's a very strict procedure, as if you were at the city clerk's office or even voting at the polls, with identification, with cross-checking, with all those same precautions, right?
That's correct, Mayor. We will have our computer system. We are moving our laptops down to the East lobby, so we will be checking people in and using the same system that we would be using if people were standing at our counter. So it will not be just handing ballots out. We have everything available to us. Our voter database software is web-based, so we can have a laptop and we can log into it. We have a secure login that we use for those. Nobody else can access it. The rooms that we use for all of our ballots, all of our absentee counting board, everything will be locked down. We have secured containers where all the ballots are stored. There's a sealing procedure for all of those containers. We take security very seriously, and we want to make sure that everything is followed to the law. We would never compromise anything as far as the law or security goes. We did send a postcard out to all of our voter households recently, in case hopefully everyone got it by now, that kind of just dispels some myths about absentee voting in general. But we wanted to make sure that one thing that we got across is that we do take all of these election law very seriously. We take voting very seriously, security, and we would never do anything that would compromise that.
Very good. Thank you. Stuff I already knew, but I always think it's good to mention it whenever we're talking about something like this and how serious it is. So, Councilmember Abraham, further discussion on the consent agenda?
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Dixon, thank you so much for the very thorough report. Everyone who's watching who may have concerns about security, the rigor that's put behind all the absentee voting ballots, I really advise you to read this report. I think it will allay a lot of fears about votes, people voting in multiple locations. That's impossible with the state qualified voter list. And just the protocols that are put in place with the absentee ballot committee that processes these ballots. It is very well thought through. Every consideration is taken into place. And again, I recommend that you read the report. The The other thing that I wanted to highlight, of course, is that I think you're always looking for volunteers to work on election day, either at the precincts or counting AV ballots. So if someone does want to volunteer their time for a very noble civic purpose, what is the best way to for them to express their interest to you?
So first of all, it is a paid position, so technically it's not a volunteer position, but we are always looking for people. The application is on the city clerk's elections webpage, which is troymi.gov/elections, and they can apply for that. We're going to be having virtual trainings this time, since obviously in-person trainings would be impossible. We are fully prepared to train everyone who is interested. We will have training classes that will be held outside of normal work hours, so in evening or Saturday, to make it possible for more people to attend. And the pay is $12 per hour, and that's whether you work in the precinct or whether you work in the counting board. And like I said earlier, we will need over 50 people in the absentee counting board. Normally we have a little over 20, so we're looking to double the size of our absentee counting board. And we did have some people that wanted to move into the counting board from the precinct, but we still will have 31 precincts manned. So we would need workers to also work out in the public. And the application is pretty simple, straightforward. There's an I-9 that has to be filled out. The ID requirement for the I-9, which is a driver's license and a social card, we will take care of that the next time we're able to meet in person, which even if that's on election day, I can still get that stuff taken care of. That's so that you would be able to get paid, basically. But aside from the application form, you just turn the application in and pretty much everybody's guaranteed a spot. So, and anyone who's a registered voter in Michigan can work for any municipality in Michigan. So, of course, Troy's the best, so you could work for Troy. And that's pretty much the only requirements. If you're 16 and 17, as long as you're a U.S. citizen and you could register to vote if you were 18, you can still work. There are student hour regulations that we can go over with the person that applies. But 16 and 17-year-olds can work, and then anyone who's a registered voter 18 and over in the state of Michigan can work.
Thank you. Councilmember Brooks.
Ms. Dixon, one other question too. Can you just kind of go over the deadlines for absentee voting? Just kind of reiterate those for this upcoming election in August.
Sure. So the Friday before the election, which is July 31st, you can have a ballot mailed to you until 5 p.m. Then on Saturday, August 1st, we are open 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. You can get ballots then. Then on Monday, the day before the election, you can still get an absentee ballot until 4 p.m. There are some, the law changed recently before the March election where if you had a spoiled ballot, you could get it mailed to you until 2 p.m. on Saturday. But in those events, we would work with the voter and make sure that they understood the deadlines. But basically the big one is that you can get a ballot mailed to you until Friday at 5 p.m., July 31st. And we'll be open until 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Saturday, and you can get a ballot last minute till 4 p.m. on Monday.
And when's the last date they can mail in their ballot for absentee?
We will take ballots until 8 p.m. on election day. So they have to be in our hands, which is another misconception, is that Michigan accepts postmarks. Some states do, but Michigan does not. Michigan requires the clerk to have the ballot in their hands by 8 p.m. on election day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Chamberlain-Carranga, do you have discussion as well?
Yes, just briefly, and just also wanted to say hats off to Clerk Dixon for all of your hard work. Did have a child break-in for a second, but I was listening with great attentiveness of all the hard work that you're doing. What I wanted to just mention was J6 caught my eye, and I wonder if City Manager Miller can speak to that. It talks about this agreement with the county about reimbursement through the CARES Act, and I just wonder if there's further information just for us to be aware of and to share with residents on that.
Thank you, Mayor. I can talk a little bit about the CARES Act in general, and City Attorney Bloom can talk about the actual interlocal government agreement. But I believe this week the county is going to authorize on expenditures for local communities related to the CARES Act. They've have some input from a few different cities. The comparable to us, I believe, is Novi. That's advising the Board of Commissioners. And we have some further information, and I can push that out to all of council. And we may be able to get reimbursement for things related to COVID. I know, and in reviewing some of the information that was passed forward to me today, like Novi is asking for absentee ballot things because they are expecting more because of COVID, as an example. We'll get some information and send it to all of council.
City Attorney Bloom, did you have anything to add about the agreement itself?
Just that this is something that is going to be required. It's an interlocal agreement between two governments. Since the Oakland County is the recipient of the federal money, we do have to enter into this agreement with them. It will be very similar to other federal grants. We'll have to keep, there's a lot of record keeping that would be required. And essentially that's what the interlocal government sets forth, is that we will be compliant with the federal grant conditions. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
City Manager Miller?
This agreement will be necessary to utilize the funds, and we were just getting this done really quick because the program ends November 30th, I believe. And all the details aren't released yet, but we will get them to council. This is just one step to be able to participate.
I just want to follow up quickly. It hasn't been fully decided what COVID-related expenses are allowed. So while Novi's put in a request for absentee ballot equipment, the county hasn't said for sure whether or not they think that is. I think they're waiting for a little more information. I think Ferndale put in for a request for AirPods. So, I mean, for some reason. So, I mean, they've got a lot to weed through at the county level. And I know that our city certainly is going to be very judicious and very careful about the requests we make, and we'll do all the proper backup of documentation, which is, I know, one thing they are for sure requiring. City Attorney Bloom, did you have something?
Just to say that there is a steering committee that is going to evaluate all of the requests and make sure that it is compliant.
Yeah. Any other discussion on the consent agenda? Okay. It's the most discussion we've had on the consent agenda in a long time. The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Councilmember Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Crainga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes. Motion carries. All items on the consent agenda have been approved. There are no memorandums or future council agenda items this evening. We already handled public comment. No council referrals, so we'll move to council comments. As a reminder of council comments, we'll have ample opportunity to discuss any of the reports in the following section. So if you have a council comment that's unrelated to the reports, we can go ahead and do those now. Guess not. Well, I have a couple, but they may seem trivial as we get to the next report section, but just a couple things. Actually, I wanted to I asked City Attorney Bloom if she could just give a brief reminder of the fireworks law in the city of Troy and how it relates to the state law, which governs us as we approach 4th of July holiday coming up. So City Attorney Bloom, if you could just speak to that briefly, be greatly appreciated as a reminder.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And actually, it is ironic that I'm hearing fireworks in my neighborhood tonight. So that would be in violation, however,
Right.
just to make that clear. We did so we are as restrictive as we can be. The state law allows us some flexibility, and we are as restrictive as we can be for the discharge of fireworks. For this holiday, this upcoming holiday, fireworks are allowed to be discharged from June 29th to July 4th from 11 a.m. to 11:45 p.m. Those are the only dates that are allowed around the 4th of July holiday. Obviously, Memorial Day and the Saturday and Sunday before, and then Labor Day, Saturday and Sunday before, are also allowable days. You cannot discharge fireworks while under the influence of liquor or drugs, and you also cannot discharge them on public property. That includes school property, It includes city property. It includes our parks. Also, you cannot discharge them on another person's property unless you have the permission of that individual. And the penalties for this are pretty significant. They can be up to $1,000. And then some of these violations are also misdemeanors, so up to 90 days punishable in jail. So that's just a quick, and that's found in Chapter 98, 0.15.01 to 9815.03. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Thank you, City Attorney Bloom. I appreciate that. I hate to seem like the anti-fun council, but it's the reality of we get a lot of emails every year, I think, from residents about fireworks, what's allowed, what's not. There's a lot of people in Troy who wish that we could have more restrictive timing around them because of their effect on pets, because sleeping babies. Mayor Pro Tem Hamilton, you may experience that this year with what it's like to have a baby and fireworks going off at all different times. But I appreciate the update, City Attorney Bloom. Also, I just wanted to touch again on the fact that our City Hall isn't open for general operations yet for the public, but we are still fully operational. We like to say call City Hall. You can call any department that's listed on our website and someone will answer the phone in normal course of business, and they can help you and set up appointments if necessary if they do need to meet with you in person. But all the essential services are still happening. You just need to make a phone call first. And so just keep that in mind. And I also wanted to touch on the fact that we're still most likely going to continue with our virtual council meetings into our next meeting. That decision hasn't been firmly made yet, but the governor's extended her order until the end of July now to allow for these virtual council meetings. So you may get to continue to see us in this format for another couple meetings, although I'm anxious to get back into council chambers when it's appropriate. Finally, I wanted to say that I did an event with the Troy Chamber today, Monday with the mayor. And it was a good group. We had talked about certain things going on in the city, and it's a good representative of the businesses in Troy. I just wanted to give a plug for the chamber. Then they have a great resources guide for businesses, small and large, throughout our city. And you don't have to be a member to see their resource guide. You go to their website, troychamber.com, and click on their COVID resources, and they have all kinds of information that's frequently updated and can really help you if you're reopening or looking to have employees come back to you. They also have a great guide as far as which restaurants are doing what during what time period. So it's great for your resident looking for food as well. But again, I'm really appreciative of the Troy Chamber and the partnership we have with them as a city. I think they're doing our businesses very, very well. And those conclude my regular council comments. So we want to move on to the reports. There were some good and important reports in here. Does anybody have any comments on the reports at this time? Councilmember Erickson Gold.
Yes, I just wanted to comment on, trying to look at my second monitor, which is a long ways from my, the library space needs assessment and facility study. I just wanted to point this out and thank Library Director Kathy Russ and City Manager Mark Miller and whoever else was involved in presenting this. It is a study from approximately 12 years ago. I think it's important that when we take this effort to go through something in the past, that it not get shelved and forgotten. I mean, it was a major endeavor. It was something that couldn't be followed through with because of the recession, but I encourage everybody to take a look at it, all of not just council, but the members of the public, and kind of understand there's been a lot of discussion about not just, what's necessary for the library operations, but what's necessary for the actual building. And we've been kind of putting a Band-Aid on it for a long time. So not to muddy the waters, we're obviously not talking about building a whole new building this year or anything of that magnitude, but we really need to start thinking over the next, year or two, definitely within the next 5 years, of what we're going to do with that building to make sure that it remains usable, remains appropriate, to make sure that we have the library we want. As was mentioned earlier tonight, if you don't have a building, you don't have a library. And that building is old. We're not going to repeat people's ages here, but it needs work. And I just want everybody to think about, what do we want to see? Do we want to keep patching it up, or do we want to sometime in the next few years think about, going forward and doing some major renovation, or even perhaps building a whole new library? So thank you again for taking that survey out of the filing cabinet and bring it back to life, because it's very informative and helpful.
To that point, I don't know if it's feasible in our library survey that's coming up, but if there's any chance, and I think Bob's still on there somewhere, he's not visibly seen, but to have, surprise, there he is. If it's possible to, I don't want to muddy, to use Anne's term, the waters too much with talk about what to do with the structure itself, but if there's a way to work in to get some information from the community now with that, I think that certainly could help start that conversation as well. But again, I'll leave it to you and the experts on how to best do that, because the millage and the funding for the ongoing operations is the most important thing right now. But my 2 cents on that one. Nice to see you again, Bob. Any other comments on reports? Councilmember Hoderick.
Related to the library, the report P2E on creating the independent library, I appreciate we discussed this in the study session, but I appreciate this summary. And I think it was Councilwoman Chamberlain-Kranga who said, that reading that summary is pretty compelling and convincing as to why it does not make sense to pursue that at this time. And for those watching or paying attention, I would direct them to take a look at that, to get that understanding. And if they have questions, of course, reach out to us. But between our discussion at that study session and this report, that is really helpful. Appreciate it for sorting out, the pros and cons, and there's a pile of cons. There really are. And to the point about the facility, the needs assessment and the facility study, yes, we don't want to muddy the water when we do this survey, but we are expending money to do a survey and to do focus groups. And I think there is just this larger order question of what kind of library does this community want in general? And the millage and operating is one piece of it, but the facility itself, all that time ago, we went through this evaluation because we had needs back then. Here we are now. Just don't want to lose the opportunity with the investment that we're already doing to bring in a survey company to, Assistant City Manager Bruner, we're asking you to, perform miracles here, not to confuse the public, but to get us all we can in terms of, the feedback from folks so we can make decisions going forward. So work your magic, pal.
I don't know about magic, but we definitely will be asking about, what kind of amenities people want. And, so that's going to be part of it. It's, not the same scope. 2008 study that we're talking about was, for basically, I think, doubling the size of the library renovation expansion. So we're not going to go into that far, but we are going to ask people, what do you want from your library? And I know already from talking to Kathy about this that some of the things are likely the same as they were 12 years ago, but other things have changed. So we're definitely going to use the opportunity with the survey to get some public input on that.
Very good. Additional comments on the reports? I'm surprised. No, I have a couple. I think this is probably the meatiest report section we've had in a long time. Oh wait, Councilmember Abraham? Sorry, good. Well, don't wait so long next time, Edna.
You looked down. I couldn't help it.
Honestly, it's the consequence of virtual meetings. Be nice to be back in council chambers. Just saying. So.
Yes, it will be, especially if you're dealing with two monitors, right? I did want to call attention to P2B, which is the forecast 2020, which the COVID-19 impacts. So, you know, it was only a month ago that we passed the budget for 2021, knowing that we were going to start to see significant impacts, expenditures that would need to be rolled into 21 because buildings were closed, work couldn't be done, some savings because we didn't have to do certain things or programs were canceled. And on the flip side, we also saw revenue decreases because we couldn't run programs, because, you know, facilities were closed. So for those who are watching the budget very closely, I strongly advise you to look at P2B, because you're starting to get a sense of what the near-term impacts of COVID-19 are going to be. And it's going to be something that we're going to be feeling for quite a long while. But this gives some insight on how it impacts us near term. We know in year 3 of our budget, you really start to see some declines in our general fund balance. And again, you know, we anticipated that there would be some negative impacts, and it is something that, you know, our CFO is monitoring very carefully and bringing it to council's attention. So I did want to call that into our residents' attention.
Thank you. That was one of the things I was going to say too, so I'm glad you did. I think that that's extremely important, and it's good to see that forecast and the update that we requested, so thank you for that. All of the reports, well, they're always important, I should say that, but these ones to me are especially, there's just a lot of work that's gone into these, and I guess I want to start with thanking city management, city staff for, and the police department and everybody in the library staff for really working hard to get us thorough reports that provide just enough information to give us what we need, but not overwhelming us with information that tends to have things get lost in the weeds. So thank you for that. I think it shows how hard you're working. In fact, when I first saw the agenda come out, saw all these reports, my first thought was, wow, they're working really, really hard. I really appreciate that, because I think it makes us look good as a city, and it makes our job as council members easier to get out and communicate with the public when we can refer directly to these reports. Along those lines, the police department training and community outreach report was listed in the agenda. It's a compilation of information that the police department has also been putting out in their social media posts. They have a section on the website now that you can link to. I think it's under, when you go to troymi.gov and then departments, police department, and then community policing, I think is where you can find that information. But it's great information. They've got a public forum scheduled to be determined exactly how it's done, but August 26th, which is a Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Again, showing their willingness to meet with the community, to explain and be out there, and to have things open and transparent so that the public can feel that they're in a good place with our police department. Right after I got elected mayor, I went to a new mayor seminar at Harvard in Boston or Cambridge, and there was a whole half day session on your police department. And I remember the various new mayors from throughout the country there, and the guest speakers talking about the importance of having a police chief that you can work well with and that you trust. And I think the city of Troy is very, very fortunate to have Chief Nastasi as our current police chief. And we have a long history of having police chiefs that have had our community's best interest always in heart. Chief Mayor before Chief Nastasi, Chief Kraft. I mean, we have a great history of that. So I think we're very fortunate to have the police chief we have now, and the ones the success that he's built upon previous chiefs. So looking forward to continued conversations with the community on this issue. And it's certainly will be, like I said, the August 26th open forum will be another key step to having those conversations. So thank you for that report. And we've talked a lot about the library tonight, the needs assessment. Although it's 12 years old, a lot of it is still very relevant. Obviously, some of it won't be, and we can look at that and see what needs to be done. But it's an important aspect of, I mean, I think now I can't remember if it was Edna or Ann who said it a few minutes ago, but the fact that, or maybe it was Ellen, the fact that we had those, they had these needs and assessed 12 years ago and they haven't been dealt with yet tells us that, those needs didn't go away in that sense. And we look at, we're averaging about $300,000 a year of Band-Aids for our public building. So we do need to really address that, because that's not going to be sustainable either. Or, the risk is you continue to do that, you lose something else in the city, and we don't want to do that either. So it's a great study. It's a long one. There's a lot of pages to it. It's a big document, but it really has fascinating information. And recognize also, for anyone who's watching now and who goes to that report, just because it talks about numbers and it talks about plans there, that is nothing the City Council is actively considering. That was a study that was done 12 years ago. It's informational only, and it's really just meant as a conversation starter and thought provoker. But just so we're perfectly crystal clear, Troy City Council has made no decisions about any new library buildings or anything. We're not moving forward in that direct direction. It's just something we're looking at as a piece of historical information. And I say that with the scars of a Civic Center conversation from a few years ago. So just so we're perfectly clear, I feel funny saying that, but some of you understand, I know. So any other comments on the reports this evening? All right, well, there's no closed session this evening. As a reminder, as we adjourn, I just want to give always a thanks to our healthcare heroes and frontline responders who've kept us safe and who've worked very hard throughout this whole pandemic for all of us. And it's really, we're very fortunate in the city of Troy to have all of you that do that. So thank you very much. And with that, we are adjourned.
Good night.
Good night.